on in. So my talk today is on the Divine Father because, we have a mother and father in our own lives, but we also, spiritually, in God consciousness, we have a divine mother and a divine father. Dads are important, and we know that. We know that. As a kid, I felt like I was highly tuned into this because I did not have a dad in my life. He fled, like our lives, like a coward. But my mom served as my father figure for many years, and I know that happens in many families. When there's a single parent, the parent will serve both sides there. So for me, I may not have known a dad for a while, but I had a lot of big people in my life who were amazing, like amazing. There was always a big person there. So today, I just wanted to talk about the Divine Father and fathers, because for Mother's Day, of course, we talked about the Divine Mother. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about the difference, first of all, between the Divine Mother and the Divine Father, and the difference between a human mother and a human father. And in general, we know this, that the mom is the nurturer, or the dad is the exciting factor in the relationship. The mom is keeping the child safe and seeing the potential in the child, or the dad is the one who's like, have you heard of bungee jumping? That kind of thing. So we've got dads are the adventurers, and moms are at home just like, please. Joseph Campbell says, the mother's job is to be, the father's job is to act, and the Divine Mother prepares us for our hero's journey. And everybody goes through the hero's journey. That is the journey of us overcoming whatever we believe is limiting about ourselves into the next greatest version of ourselves. So the mother, Divine Mother, holds the understanding and the truth of who we really are, who we really are, and what we're capable of. Or the Divine Father is the activity that urges us into action. The Divine Father hands us our tools. But they both are, of course, because God is all things, a Divine Mother and Divine Father are just different expressions of God. Just like everything on the planet is an expression of God, and each of us are an expression of God, and we're all different here on the surface, right? We appear to be different. And I was thinking about a symbol that could represent both the power of the Divine Mother and Divine Father. And what I thought of was an acorn. Because a little acorn has within it, there's the nut on the outside for sure, but inside, there's like one, sometimes two little seeds. And it's the acorn that you see on the outside is protecting the little seeds. And so that would be like the Divine Mother, the potential in that acorn. The acorn has within it the possibility to grow into an oak tree, but the Divine Father then would represent the power working through those seeds. So there's also an environmental factor that needs to take place. The acorn needs to be put in the ground, right? Not all acorns grow into oak trees. Some acorns are gathered by squirrels. Some acorns, moms, you find them in your dryer because the kids have loaded their pockets up with acorns, right? That's how I got my whole collection of acorns. I found them in my kids' dirty laundry. But this still, everything the acorn needs to grow into the mighty oak tree is already contained within it. It just needs the environmental support. Now, I was looking for some stories in the Bible. When I talked about the Divine Mother, I talked about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and kind of her journey. There's not a lot written about Joseph. But we know Joseph was just a good man. Joseph, the father of Jesus, he was just a good man. Even when he found out that Mary was pregnant, and he believed it was another man's baby, and he didn't want to shame her any farther. He did plan on divorcing her, but the angel visited Joseph and said, that's not another man's baby, just raise the baby as, he's an important baby. And so Joseph did it, but he was always kind. He was kind. He gave Jesus a skill, taught him to be a carpenter. But I wanted some stories about men who we could learn from them. And we could learn maybe how to express our best self, or maybe what we shouldn't be doing, right? And what came to me was probably one of the most renowned of the sacred scriptures, and it's the story of Abraham, who loved God so much he was willing to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Now, when I heard this story as a child, it didn't sit very well with me. Because I was like, that guy he was willing to sacrifice his own kid, you know, and I would eye the big people in my life. I was like, my mom wouldn't do that, right? So the story didn't sit with me very well at all as a child. And as I grew older, I decided, you know, I want to do a deeper dive into this. I want to see, you know, what's really going on here. And so I discovered that not only did I think he was the worst dad ever, but he wasn't a great husband either. That's what in the story, when you just read the story and just take it at face value. And so here we go. Here's the story, right? Here's the story. God appears to Abram. He was Abram before he was Abraham. God appears to Abram and says, you're going to father a nation. And so you need to go to Canaan. So Abram, at 75 years old, he says, okay. So he does this. He's going to follow God's will. He takes his wife and his nephew, and they go to Canaan. Now, Abram and his wife, they've never had children. It's something they really, really, really wanted so bad. Okay, but they had no kids. They get to Canaan, and then there's a famine. So they end up going to Egypt. So they get to Egypt, and Abram is not real comfortable there. And he worries for his safety. Now, as it happens, the Pharaoh thinks that Abram's wife is quite lovely. So Abram says, oh, well, you know, she's my sister. Yeah. And he gives his wife to the Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh is, well, I'm going to give you all these riches. And he did. He just loaded up Abram with donkeys and camels and so many good things. But God visited many plagues upon Pharaoh for doing this. Pharaoh finds out that Sarah is a married woman. And he calls Abram to him and he says, why would you do this to me? I welcomed you. You know what? You take your wife and you go. You will leave Egypt. The Pharaoh wanted him out of there so badly, he sent his own men to escort them and all Abram's new riches out of Egypt. Okay, so that was a lot. That was a lot right there. Then they end up in another land, and again, Abram is worried for his safety. But as it happens, the king of this land finds Abram's wife quite lovely. So Abram does it again. But the Lord visited the king in a dream right away, told the king that she was a married woman, and the king gave her back to Abram, and they left. But what I saw in this story at first glance, I'm like, this is not attractive. Right? There's a lot going on here, but I'm like, what? Okay. What I found interesting was that even though when the Lord visited Abram and told him, you will be the father of a nation, Abram was still afraid and still took matters into his own hands because he was afraid of his own safety. He did what it took. Right? That's what he just thought. He had to do what it took to protect himself because he did not yet have faith in God. Now, if we look deeper at this story, symbolically what this story is sharing with us is Abram, who he did become Abraham, right? Abram was just a typical person. He wasn't a really spiritual person. He did not have a lot of faith. He had no vision. He was not sitting at home before all this started, being preoccupied with being the father of a nation. He wasn't thinking about all that. At the onset of trouble, he would turn to deceit to protect himself, even though he had had an encounter with the divine. Now, I can remember when I was younger, I would think, oh, if only I could have an encounter with the divine, all my life would be great. My life would be perfect. I'd never have any problems ever again. But you know, the stories that we hear about these famous people that had an encounter with the divine, their lives weren't magical from that moment forward. In fact, they struggled. And it's because it's not the encounter with the divine that turns somebody into a person of faith. It's they overcome the struggle within themselves to trust that that force who had the encounter with them knew what it was doing. That Abraham had to learn that God knew what he was doing when he chose him to be the father of a nation. So Abraham struggled with his own nature, his moral weaknesses, his fears. And see, these are not characteristics of a soul. They're characteristics of the ego. Any of us could do that on our worst day. His soul, though, was awakened. And Abraham became a man of great vision and strength, and he moved into his potential. So the story then about the sacrifice of Isaac, this story, it's not about a parent choosing between God and their child. It is about the willingness to sacrifice whatever it is that would limit us and keep us small. What Abraham did in this story was he turned his eyes to God only. That's what he did. He turned his eyes to God only. God stayed his hand. Isaac was not sacrificed. But Isaac in this story represents anything we might be afraid of losing. See, Isaac was a miracle child for Abraham and Sarah, a miracle child. And so Abraham had to eventually overcome his own fears of losing this miracle child. Because as long as we have any bit of fear, we're not standing in the full faith, that big faith that we could be in. Okay, so Abraham, he surrendered. Abraham surrendered his personal will to divine will to embody that greater light, right? So he could become that expression of that man that stories would be told about for thousands of years. So for us, this is about listening to the voice of the divine within us also. Listening to being guided, remembering to pray instead of talking about what we fear all the time. Pray about it, right? And remember the indwelling spirit. This reminds me of this thing we all have to do if we get on an airplane. Right? The first thing they tell everybody is if the cabin, for any weird reason, depressurizes, you put your own mask on first, and then your mask on the people around you, okay, your children. Now, I had heard this before as a young adult, but when you become a mom, you just hear everything differently. And when I heard this again as a mom, I was like, no, I must take care of my children first. But see, what happens is that when we're worried, we're out here focusing on the problem. Okay, Abraham surrendered. He put his own mask on first, is what he did. He went totally into faith in God, is what he did. Now, this being a child sacrifice in the story, when I brought this up, I saw some of your faces out there. It's like, this is a Father's Day story? But you know what? We sacrifice the well-being of the people that we love. We sacrifice our own well-being when we don't put our own oxygen mask on first. We sacrifice our own well-being and the well-being of the people we love when we focus on everything that's wrong out here instead of remembering first, oh wait, I'm going to pray about it instead of complain about it. I'm going to align with the divine within. Okay, so that's what this story is about. Turning to the divine within before we take action out here. That way we don't go into reaction mode. When we align with the divine within, we're open to receive answers. We get guidance. So Abraham, really, he represents any person who ever struggled. And I think, I know I can say that. Yeah. I can say that on some of my worst days. I didn't do great stuff either, right? But look at all that Abraham went through. Look at all that he sacrificed to become a man who fathered a nation. So it's kind of the Father's Day story is about him fathering a nation because he had to become a person of complete and total faith to have done that. Once he completely stepped into his faith, that is when all the abundance available for him was given to him. So we have the Divine Mother who provides everything we could possibly need, sees our brightest potential, knows what we're capable of. And this expression of the Divine Mother was in Abraham. That potential was always there. It was always there, but he wasn't acting on it. He wasn't even thinking about it. So then the Divine Father is the part of God that is urging us into activity to step into that potential. And it was that movement through Abraham, right? The voice telling him, okay, you're gonna leave here and you're gonna go to Canaan. Stop giving your wife away. Okay. Right. Okay, and this was his journey, though. This was his journey. So you think again about the acorn. Within that acorn is that seed, and it's always reminding itself how to become a tree. Right? There is power in that seed reminding itself how to become a tree. Right? So that's at work within us too, all the time. All the time, reminding us that we can become a better version of ourselves. Keep growing into the next best version. Now, in the ministry of Jesus talked about the Divine Father all the time. This was his ministry. In the book of John, he says, it's the Father who dwells within me. He does all the work. He does all the work. Now, Jesus performed a lot of miracles, but he credited every miracle as being done by the Father, right? Being done by that source of awe, right? The understanding, the activity, everything that moved through him. He talked about how if people would have faith in him, they could do all of that that he did and more. Like, he wasn't even claiming to be the most awesome person who could do all this. He was saying, have faith in me, trust what I'm teaching about the Father within, turning to heaven within. You can do all this too. You can do all of this. So that was basically his message. Trust the Father within. Turn to the Father within. Keep your eyes on heaven. Don't let conditions out here trap you. Pray. Pray about everything. Stay in prayer. Jesus never worried about any of the miracles. At least it doesn't come across that way in the stories. Because he would say, I'm doing the Father's work. It's not me. I'm going about doing my Father's work. That's what he would say. So the walking on water, that was the Father's work. Calming the storm, that was the Father's work. Raising the dead, multiplying the fishes and the loaves, that was all the Father's work. He turned it all over to God. He didn't stand on his boat, right, ready to walk on water and just like reach his toes down there. It's like, is this going to even work? Like, I've never seen anybody walk on water before. Like, I don't know. There's this physics and aerodynamics and stuff, and like, he didn't say that. He just went about his Father's work. He let his Father within handle the miracle part. What Jesus did was he made himself available for all that. And he said yes to all that. When he was guided, he did what he was guided to do. So he took responsibility also for his actions. He wasn't sitting in somebody's comfortable house just drinking wine all day. So he listened and he acted on what he was directed to do next. Now that's our charge also. That's our charge. We make ourselves available for all the good. We don't have to figure out how it all happens though, right? That's the Father's part. We're available, we say yes to it, we hand it over though. Our part is to keep reminding ourselves to align with the divine within, to pray instead of complain about it, and we listen and act when we are guided. So there's the Divine Father is the activity of God in our lives. We get an inspiration, we get an idea, and then along with that inspiration and that idea comes the means to make it so in our lives, to become manifest, to become something physical in our life. So between that inspiration and the moment it is in our lives, there's all this stuff happening in between. And that's the work of our Father. That's the work of our Father. Now, Abraham at first, he didn't have any faith. He was like, well, okay, I'll do this, but he didn't have faith off the bat. In fact, he didn't have faith till he moved around a couple times. But he had the activity of God kept moving through him. God never gave up on him. That's another really good thing for us to remember. God never gave up on Abraham. God doesn't give up on us. Like, I know sometimes I hear people say, like, well, I feel like the universe forgot about me. I feel like I'm being punished. It's like, God doesn't forget about you, but go here, right? Go here. So at first, Abraham didn't have the faith, but then he did. Then he did, and because of that, he fathered a nation. Now, we may not always have faith either. I don't always have faith. Sometimes I will complain and grumble about it, for a little while before I remember. It's like, oh, right. Say a prayer. But see, whether we have faith or not, there's always that greater force. The force that put the galaxies into their spin, the force that creates worlds and people and babies and everything that we could see, that's always at work within us, whether or not we have faith. Whether or not we have faith. In the book of Philippians, the Apostle Paul said, "For it is God who inspires you with the will to do the good thing which you already desire to do." Okay, we have a desire, we get inspired. Where'd that come from? Came from God. Came from God. He goes on to say, "Do all things without disputing and doubting." I like to dispute things all the time. Are you sure? Like, really? Yeah. So if you're inspired to do something, if you feel excited about creating something in your life, where do you think that came from? Right? It came from the force that creates worlds. In Jesus' life, it sounds like, when you read about him, it sounds like every day he was just kind of in the mode of, use me. What next? How can I be of service? Right? He seemed to just always be aligned. In some of the stories, he stops and he looks up. Like, he just looks up. Just feeling that connection. He did what he was guided to do. But he was always ready to do that next thing because he was always aligned. He was always paying attention to the Father within him. We are not actually designed to sit around and wait for things to happen. Right? I mean, sometimes we have to wait on things. If you plant your acorn seeds, you wait a little while for that tree to pop up there, right? But we are not designed to just sit around and think, well, I hope something nice happens in my life. I don't know what that would be. That can put us in victim consciousness. And because then we're waiting, well, something out here needs to happen so I can be happy and have some excitement in my life, right? But look where that got Abraham. Like when he was looking out here, when he was worried out here about his safety and his security and what he would do next, he still struggled. He still was out of faith. He wasn't in faith yet. And he felt like he had to manage the circumstances in his life so he could be okay. His life became abundant when he surrendered his fears. That's how he chose to walk by faith alone. So when we're walking by faith, we see God in all things. We see like everything on this planet that exists right now has those cosmic forces working through them. Like you call it God, I like to call it cosmic forces. But Abraham, he overcame all that kept him small because of those mighty forces that never gave up on him and always worked through him, always guiding him to do the next thing. Now, every single hero has a story. Any of your favorite hero stories, whether you watched them watched a movie or you read a book, all of those heroes, they had to overcome a belief in their own smallness to move into a greater version of themselves. So our call to action this week, our call to action. Think again about that force that created the worlds. All the planets, all the galaxies, that force is at work in you right here and right now. You already have everything you need within you. You have everything you need, but there also has to be movement in your life. We have to be taking action, and we have to be taking inspired action. There's inspired action and there's desperate action, which is what Abraham started off doing, taking desperate actions. Okay, but we take inspired action. So I have an affirmation for us. You ready, Kevin? I am a powerful receiver of divine inspiration. Let's say that together. I am a powerful receiver of divine inspiration. We are designed to be guided by God. That's how we're designed. So think about what it is that you want to grow in your own life right now. We all have something that we want to create. It could be big, it could be small. Maybe we're creating it from scratch. Maybe we're working on something that we already started. But remember, you were inspired, right? That desire came from somewhere, right? Came from the bigger forces that are working through you. So remember where that came from, because along with your inspiration and your desire to create or grow something new in your life, also comes the means to make it so. You're not given a brilliant idea or inspiration without also being given spiritual backup on how to make it happen. Right? The universe has your back on this, on anything you want to create. Now, it's when we take inspired action that we call forth the divine forces into our own lives. We call forth the divine forces through us. We become the heart and the hands of God, walking around in this world, taking action in our own life. And that is how we are creating heaven on earth. So until next time, remember, you are the activity of spirit in a body. You are the heart and the hands of God in this world. You are a soul designed for growth and goodness. In everything you do, you are blessed. And so it is.
Amen.
Thank you.